we are going to be discussing in this episode more anecdotal eclipse stories, personal, and just how people can expect to work with eclipses on a more personal level. Because last time we kind of just talked about what they signify as like omens. Here's almost that. Okay. So yeah, we're getting more into real life examples of stories. And someone asked me, they were like, well, how do I work with an eclipse? And I would argue you're not really working with anything. It's just, they're kind of portals, you know, that
one enters into, right?
Yeah.
And then you exit out at 6 months later?
I would say so, until the next eclipse. Yeah, the effects are seen to kind of last until the next one. But really what you want to pay attention to see how it might affect or impact your life is what house is the eclipse falling in your personal chart? What planets is it hitting in your personal chart? And you can do a bi-wheel.
Or what angles is hitting in the chart as well.
Correct, yeah. You can do a bi-wheel where you put your natal chart and then the chart of the eclipse, and you look at what house overlays it falls in, what planets it's touching, or what planets the nodes are touching. That will give you the idea of what area of life, what themes these beginnings or endings will relate to. So yeah, how has this, we just had an eclipse series. We had a lunar, a solar, and then another lunar, which was on the evening of July 4th, some places July 5th. How has it affected you, Mario?
For me, it hit me in my fourth house.
It hit you.
Yeah. Hit me in my fourth.
Same, actually.
Yeah, so for me, it was more about like changing where I'm living. And it was something I already had a sense was going to occur. I didn't realize it would happen on an eclipse, but it kind of did, like a couple of days before. And yeah, that's how it was. Pretty intense. That's how it hit me. How about you?
Well, by hit, do you mean the moon was in your fourth house or the sun? Because with the lunar eclipse that just happened, it's in opposition. So what planet or what luminary are you talking about?
So everything's in Capricorn, so it was opposing my fourth house. It's my fourth house in Cancer.
Gotcha.
So all the Capricorn planets kind of, especially with Pluto and Jupiter and Saturn, just kind of X-rayed into my fourth house and dispelled what's no longer necessary.
And you actually have secured a new home?
Within minutes, I found a new place. That's pretty interesting.
So
it was like I took that energy and right away brought it back out to grab what I needed. So it's really interesting in that sense.
I'm a Pisces rising. So mine was also fourth if we're using tropical. But the moon was in Capricorn, actually. So the moon was in my 10th house, touching my Venus.
Okay.
Within 4 degrees, actually, of my Venus, this eclipse. And I did enter a new relationship.
Interesting.
And I have had losses of relationships over the January eclipse. I lost a relationship. So for
do
me,
you remember what planets was being hit at that eclipse?
No, not offhand.
Okay, that's all right.
Not offhand. I would need to look back, but just kind of a silver lining, I think, because people will tend to put the ominous kind of tint on an eclipse, but it kind of goes to show like what planets is it activating and touching in your natal chart will give you a more full picture of this memorable event that will have probably a longitudinal impact.
So this chart that I put up is for the recent eclipse that happened over the weekend. This was the 4th of July lunar eclipse. And this one was let's see. So it was in opposition, it was a full moon. Was it a full moon?
Yeah, because lunar has to be full moon.
So a full moon with a Cancer Capricorn opposition. As you see in this chart, it's very interesting because all the planets right now are lined up in Capricorn. So if you think of the US chart, all these planets over here in Capricorn, especially in this particular eclipse, Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn, and the moon are lined up in opposition to the sun, which is right now in Cancer, Mercury, and no longer the North Node because it went back into Gemini. But so this definitely portends something for the U.S., what we're going through. And if you think about what we mentioned a couple
It's not like
episodes
we're
back,
going through anything right now.
yeah, right. And then consider that Mars just went into Aries, and it'll be in Aries for the rest of the year. Yeah. So this is the chart that I set up. It's our local time.
Okay.
And so that opposition is real interesting. The nodes are not in those signs anymore, but yeah. So I thought I'd share this, but I'm going to stop share. We're going to go to a different chart now.
I'd love to hear about friends of yours or clients. Do you have any maybe vague general things you can touch on you've seen occur with eclipses?
I know there's, and I'll touch on this a little later. There has been deaths on eclipses, especially when one thinks about the full moon and the power of a full moon for it being the best time to like practice certain types of projection, astral projection, meditation. It's easier to get out of the body. And of course, in a negative sense too, it's easier for the spirit to leave the body, especially if it's near such a point. And, but there were some notes about breakups in relationships and deaths in the family and other fated events that had great impact for the months following,
Or permanent impacts.
Yes, and you're going to go into that, right?
Yeah. I do want to touch, though. I have heard some people say, oh, don't do ritual around eclipse, maybe because of what you mentioned, because it is such a potent, powerful time. So I think there's kind of maybe mixed feelings on that, whether to ritualize an eclipse or not. Teach their own, though, right?
I mean, as we know in our cultures around the world, there are definitely cultures that are utilizing the magic of these eclipses for sure. So this stuff is happening, and it's happening in symbolic and majestic ways that we don't always see unless we kind of want to decode what's going on around us.
You can decode.
I can decode, but maybe I'll save that for another time.
So we'll throw up some charts. I have a friend who shared a very personal, pretty traumatic story of finger loss during an eclipse. I thought it'd be interesting. Let me pull the chart. Let's see what other planets were being activated during this person's experience. So this was back in 2013. And the story is basically they are a carpenter and they were working on a project and they had what they describe as a freak accident with a table saw. And they had the saw go through 3 fingers. They lost one. They were able to hold on to the others. And obviously that has a permanent effect, especially for someone who works with their hands so intimately. And so we pulled the chart. And it's super interesting because the first thing I noticed, because for accidents, we want to look at what's Mars doing. And as you can see, Mars in Virgo during the time of this accident, which was a few days after the eclipse, it was within a week time frame of this eclipse. So Mars is actually squaring their natal Uranus and their natal Saturn. And to me, that's a huge accident-prone kind of signature when you have Mars squaring Uranus or conjunct Uranus or opposite, is like a time to kind of be more vigilant in general, but especially with an eclipse. Unfortunately, in this case, it led to a pretty tragic event. I actually have this book, which is interesting because it talks about, it's kind of a cookbook astrology book, but it does talk about Mars square Uranus. And it says, with rash energy, eccentricity, and self-will, could have a sudden blunt encounter or take a foolish risk. This is not the time to count on anyone or take advice. Take special care in traffic and in handling electrical or mechanical appliances and devices. Where was this book for that person? But it's like, you just have, you go through what you go through. Right?
I mean, you can think about it like anytime you see Mars in transit to any of your personal planets or even outer planets, as in this case, think about it like Mars is in a sense, it's aggressive, potentially dangerous energy out to possibly cause transformation or change or harm to Saturn would be the physical body. All that rules what is physical.
Yeah.
And to
and
Uranus,
more permanent too.
right,
Saturn.
right. And what Uranus would be more, it would be more the energy body, the nervous system, machines, electrical energy, and such.
Yeah. So that's that example. Do you want to go into the example you had for today?
Yes, I'll bring up another chart. I'm going to go into something a little more dire, and I'll share my experience around it. Let's see where the chart is. Okay, share. Oh, I put it away. Just a second. Okay, so this is a chart that I'm going to put up of the Great American, well, there's a lot of Great American solar eclipses. This particular one is the one that occurred in August 21st, 2017. I put up the chart for Tidewater, Oregon, because I was in Tidewater, Oregon. I was actually at the Beloved Festival, which usually happens in Oregon every year. It's kind of a small, maybe 2,000, not a huge festival. It's an amazing festival. It's one of my favorites, usually in the middle of the forest, some forest. And I was there, and at the time of the eclipse, I actually went outside knowing that eclipses are really not, at least in my culture, in my ancient culture, that you want to have certain respect around it. You don't want to be outside and to take in the rays. But it was we were actually celebrating it, right? It was the first eclipse in a long time that America could kind of see go all across, and Oregon was one of the places that you could see it. And so I remember we were all outside on a hillside. And what's fascinating is that as it occurred, it was really an impactful event and a foreboding event, in the sense that all of a sudden you felt cold and you actually saw the sun being blacked out. And all of a sudden everyone on the hillside got cold. And later on, I talked about stories with others about how actually people were freaking out when it occurred. Like it was more of like a psychological thing or effect on them. But I remember one story of some guy tripping out because he thought someone took his drugs, and he started screaming and attacking another person. And I guess 4 guys had to hold him down during it until he calmed. And this was all around us. We were all in like little groups, like looking up into the sky. And it was fascinating. And I remember feeling just a sense of almost like, not my gut dropping fully, but almost like something dropped within me. And I remember feeling a sense of foreboding. And not too long after, I found that I actually, once I got out of the festival, I found out that someone very close to me was in the middle of like their life's end. And so in a sense, I was able to talk to them, but it was not long after that they passed. So it's a fascinating sense of experience, but also, very hard, because it was a great loss to me. And this occurred, and this was the chart for it. You see majority of the planets in Virgo and Leo, and the sun and moon, it was a new moon lunar eclipse, and it was opposing Neptune. And in the person's chart who passed, there was definitely a lot of Aquarius and Leo happening in their chart or being hit.
It was a solar eclipse.
This one was
With when the sun and moon are conjunct, it's a solar.
okay, solar eclipse, yeah.
I'm curious, do you think there's something about a solar eclipse, the sun being blocked out, where souls can kind of like pass over?
There is a lot of talk. I mean, there's a lot of talk about and esoteric ideas about how souls come in on the Tropic of Cancer, right? Which would make sense, birth and motherhood, and souls leave on the Tropic of Capricorn, like death. And there's ideas around, of course, gates, moon gates and sun gates, and even the fixed star Sirius being a gate, according to some perspectives. But yeah, since we talked about eclipses being portals, like certainly it could
Yeah.
be to that extent.
It can be heavy. There's a lot of kind of heavy lore and ideas around it. But I think it doesn't necessarily have to be a judgment that has to be applied to it.
All right, so that's it. We're good. Okay. Thanks for tuning in.